Planning a wedding is supposed to be a joyful experience, a celebration of love and unity. For me, a 31-year-old deeply in love with my fiancée Karen, it felt like the beginning of the rest of our lives. After 4 years together, we had built a strong foundation, or so I thought. Karen, at 32, was everything I imagined my partner would be. Confident, organized, and capable of making even the most mundane moments feel special. Our shared dreams of a future together seemed perfectly aligned, and I couldn't wait to say I do. The preparations were already in full swing. We had picked a date, set the venue, and begun crafting the guest list, a task that turned out to be far more challenging than I had anticipated. Karen had strong opinions about almost everything, but I appreciated her passion. I wanted this wedding to reflect both of us, even if it meant compromising on details here and there. However, things started to shift as we discussed the people we wanted to celebrate with. Karen mentioned early on that she wasn't comfortable with my little brother, Chad, attending. At first, I brushed it off, thinking it might be about logistics or guest count, but the more I probed, the more evasive she became. Chad, at 26, was not just my brother, he was my best friend, the one person who had been with me through everything. Excluding him from the wedding wasn't just a deal breaker. It was unthinkable. Despite Karen's reservations, I was determined to ensure Chad's presence. Our bond was too deep, too meaningful, for me to imagine such an important day without him. I believed Karen would eventually come around, but the first seeds of unease had been planted. The guest list quickly became a sticking point. Karen and I would sit down at the dining table, each with a notebook in hand, trying to finalize who would share this monumental day with us. While most of the discussions were straightforward, her discomfort with Chad came up time and again. "Do we really need to invite him?" she asked one evening, her voice casual but firm. I was caught off guard. "Of course we do," I replied, thinking it was obvious. Chad wasn't just family, he was my closest confidant. Karen didn't argue much at first, simply nodding and changing the subject, but as the weeks went by, her reluctance grew more pronounced. I couldn't understand it. Chad wasn't a problematic guest by any stretch of the imagination. He was kind, respectful, and loved by everyone who knew him. There had never been any tension between him and Karen before, at least not that I'd noticed. I started to wonder if there was something deeper going on, but every time I brought it up, Karen would dismiss my concerns. "It's not personal," she'd say, waving her hand as though she were brushing away my questions. Her vagueness frustrated me. I wasn't asking for much, just an explanation. Why wouldn't she want my brother, my favorite person in the world, at our wedding? I began to feel like we were talking in circles. Karen would insist it was nothing serious, just her wanting to keep the guest list manageable, but I wasn't buying it. Our conversations became more strained as I tried to defend Chad's place on the list. "This isn't negotiable," I told her one night, my patience wearing thin. "He's coming, and that's final." Karen didn't argue outright, but her silence spoke volumes. It wasn't an agreement, it was avoidance. The tension around this issue lingered in the background, unresolved but growing heavier with each passing day. Chad wasn't just my younger brother, he was the person who had shaped my life in ways no one else ever could. Growing up, our parents weren't bad people, but they weren't exactly attentive either. They had a free-spirited approach to life, often leaving Chad and me at our grandmother's house while they pursued their own adventures. When I was old enough, they left us in my care entirely, trusting me to look after the house and my little brother. It was an unconventional upbringing, but it forged an unbreakable bond between us. Those years taught me responsibility far earlier than most kids my age. I wasn't just a big brother. I was a protector, a caregiver, and sometimes the only stability Chad had. He was only a kid, looking up to me for guidance, and I made it my mission to make sure he felt safe and loved, even when things around us were chaotic. Chad, in turn, became my anchor. His laughter, his curiosity, and his unwavering trust in me gave my life purpose during times when I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. As we grew older, that bond didn't fade, it deepened. Chad was the first person I turned to with good news, bad news, or even just mundane updates about my day. He was more than a sibling. He was my best friend, the person who knew me better than anyone else. No one could make me laugh the way Chad could, and no one else's opinion mattered to me more. So when Karen began to push back against his inclusion in our wedding, it felt personal, like an attack on the most sacred relationship in my life. Chad was my family in every sense of the word, and excluding him wasn't just a logistical issue or a minor disagreement. It was a betrayal of everything I held dear. For me, this wasn't about a guest list or wedding politics. It was about loyalty, love, and standing by the person who had stood by me my entire life. Chad wasn't just a part of my wedding. He was a part of me. Anything less than his full inclusion was unthinkable. As the weeks passed, Karen's resistance to Chad's presence at our wedding grew harder to ignore. It started subtly, an offhand comment here, a dismissive shrug there. But soon, her disapproval became more pointed. "I just don't think it's appropriate," she said one evening, carefully choosing her words but avoiding my gaze. "Appropriate?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's that supposed to mean?" She hesitated, mumbling something vague about family dynamics and wanting the day to feel harmonious. But the more she spoke, the less sense it made. Karen wasn't giving me a concrete reason for excluding Chad, only a persistent insistence that his absence would make things easier. Her refusal to elaborate only fueled my frustration. I couldn't wrap my head around her behavior. Chad had never been anything but polite and kind to Karen, going out of his way to welcome her into our family. He was the type of person who made everyone feel at ease. How could someone so warm and open be seen as a problem? I tried to address it calmly, asking her outright what the issue was, but her responses were always vague or dismissive. "You're overthinking it," she'd say, waving the matter off as though it were a minor detail. But it wasn't minor to me. This was my little brother we were talking about, someone who had been by my side through every important moment in my life. Each time the topic came up, the tension between us grew. Karen's unwillingness to compromise or even explain herself began to cast a shadow over our wedding planning. What should have been a joyful collaboration was turning into a quiet battle of wills, with Chad's place at the heart of the conflict. The breaking point came one evening when we sat down to finalize the guest list. The conversation started off smoothly enough, deciding on table arrangements and revisiting a few RSVPs, but inevitably circled back to Chad. Karen sighed audibly as his name came up, her annoyance no longer hidden behind polite indifference. "Do we have to do this again?" she said, her tone sharp. "I already told you how I feel about him being there." I set my pen down, leaning back in my chair. "And I've told you," I replied evenly, "that this isn't up for discussion. Chad is coming to the wedding, period." Karen crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "You're not even trying to see my side of things." "I can't see your side when you won't tell me what it is," I shot back. "Why don't you want him there? What's the real reason?" She hesitated for a moment, then looked me straight in the eye. "Fine. You want the truth? I don't want your brother at our wedding because it'll make my family uncomfortable. His lifestyle isn't something they approve of, and frankly, neither do I." I stared at her, stunned. His lifestyle? The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else, not the woman I had planned to spend my life with. "You're talking about the person he is, who he loves. That's not a lifestyle, that's Chad. And if you can't see that, I don't think we have anything left to talk about." Karen's expression shifted from defiance to shock, as if she hadn't expected me to push back so forcefully. But I wasn't about to compromise on this. "If Chad isn't welcome, then neither am I," I told her firmly. "This wedding is off, unless you can accept him. Completely." The silence that followed was deafening. Karen didn't apologize, didn't try to explain further. She just stared at me, unyielding. For the first time, I saw clearly that this wasn't a disagreement we could work through. It was a fundamental divide, one that left no room for compromise. I thought I had prepared myself for Karen's answer when I demanded the truth about her problem with Chad, but nothing could have readied me for what she said next. "I don't want a faggot at my wedding," she spat, her words venomous and devoid of remorse. "My family doesn't approve of this lifestyle, and neither do I. It's disgusting." For a moment I couldn't breathe. Her words echoed in my head, each syllable sharper than the last. I looked at her, searching for some sign of regret, some flicker of understanding that she had crossed a line. But there was nothing, just a cold, unyielding stare. I had known Karen wasn't particularly progressive, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. My mind immediately went to Chad. I thought of the day he came out to me, trembling with fear as he told me he was bisexual. He had been so vulnerable, so scared of losing my love and acceptance. I remembered the promise I made to myself that day, to protect him, to ensure he never felt that kind of fear or rejection again. And here was the woman I had planned to marry, spewing the very kind of hatred I had sworn to shield him from. Do you even hear yourself right now? I finally said, my voice trembling with anger. You're talking about my brother, my best friend, as if he's less than human. How can you be this cruel? Karen rolled her eyes, as though I were the one being unreasonable. It's just how I feel. I shouldn't have to apologize for that. That was it. Any lingering doubts I had about calling off the wedding evaporated in that instant. I stood up, my decision made. You're right, I said, my voice steadier now. You don't have to apologize, but I also don't have to marry someone who thinks this way. We're done. Her eyes widened in shock, but I didn't give her a chance to argue. I asked for the engagement ring back, told her she had 10 minutes to pack her things, and made it clear that I wasn't backing down. Karen had shown me her true self, and there was no coming back from this. As Karen's words echoed in my mind, I couldn't help but think back to the day Chad came out to me. He was 20 at the time, and I remember the exact moment vividly. We were sitting in my tiny apartment, sharing a pizza and laughing about some dumb movie we had just watched. Then, out of nowhere, his laughter stopped. He grew quiet, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced with a nervous energy that made my stomach churn. "Hey, can I tell you something?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I set my pizza slice down and turned to him, sensing that whatever he was about to say was important. "Of course," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady despite the sudden weight in the room. Chad hesitated for what felt like an eternity, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. "I'm bi," he finally said, the words rushing out as though he had been holding them back for years. I like guys and girls. For a moment I was stunned, not because of what he had said, but because of the sheer vulnerability in his eyes. He looked like he was bracing for an impact, as though he expected me to recoil or judge him. My heart broke seeing my brother, the person I loved most in the world, so scared of how I might react. Without thinking, I reached over and pulled him into a hug. "Chad," I said, my voice firm but full of love, "I don't care who you love. You're my brother, and I'll always have your back. Always." That was the day I promised myself that no one would ever make Chad feel unloved or unsafe because of who he was. And now, sitting across from Karen, who had just hurled one of the most hateful slurs imaginable at him, that promise burned in my chest like a vow etched in stone. There was no way I could stand by and let someone like her diminish the incredible person Chad was. My little brother deserved better. So did I. Karen's words were still ringing in my ears when I realized there was no path forward for us. Her refusal to apologize or even acknowledge the weight of her hateful comment was the final nail in the coffin. This wasn't a simple disagreement. It was a fundamental clash of values, and no amount of talking would bridge that gap. I stood up, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. "We're done," I said, my voice steady but resolute. "There's no coming back from this. You don't just get to insult my brother, my family, and expect me to pretend everything's fine." Karen's eyes widened, her expression shifting from shock to indignation. "You're going to throw away 4 years over one word?" she snapped, as though I were the unreasonable one in this scenario. "One word?" I repeated, incredulous. "This isn't about a word, Karen. It's about who you are, what you believe. I can't marry someone who thinks the way you do. I won't." She scoffed, muttering something under her breath, but I didn't care to hear it. I extended my hand, gesturing for the ring. "Give it back," I said firmly. Her lips trembled, and for a moment I thought she might argue, but then she pulled the ring off her finger and slammed it into my palm. "Fine," she said bitterly. "You're going to regret this." I ignored her words, walking to the door and opening it. "You've got 10 minutes to pack your things and leave. If you're not gone by then, I'm calling the cops." Karen glared at me but didn't say another word. As she moved to collect her belongings, I stood by the door, my mind racing. The relationship I had invested years in was crumbling before my eyes, but I felt no regret. If anything, I felt relief. The person Karen had revealed herself to be was someone I could never share a future with. Once Karen was gone, the next task loomed over me like a storm cloud: canceling the wedding. It wasn't just about making logistical calls. It was about facing the reality of what had just happened. Every vendor, every email, every conversation would be a reminder of the plans I had built with someone who no longer belonged in my life. I started with the venue. Picking up the phone, I explained the situation in the simplest terms possible, sparing them the gritty details. "We're not moving forward with the wedding," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The person on the other end offered polite condolences, but their tone couldn't mask the awkwardness. I felt exposed, as though the collapse of my relationship was a spectacle for strangers. Next came the guests. The thought of telling friends and family about the cancellation was daunting, but I wasn't going to lie or cover for Karen's behavior. I sent out a group message, keeping it concise but clear. The wedding is off. Karen and I are no longer together due to irreconcilable differences. I appreciate your understanding and support. Predictably, the responses came flooding in. Some were sympathetic, others confused, and a few pressed for more details. To those closest to me, I didn't hold back. I told them exactly what Karen had said about Chad and why I couldn't go through with marrying her. Most were horrified, their support immediate and unwavering. Despite the chaos, I felt a strange sense of peace as the news spread. The wedding was supposed to be a celebration of love and unity, but without Chad there, or with someone like Karen by my side, it could never have been that. Canceling wasn't just the right choice, it was the only choice. As word spread about the cancelled wedding, it was inevitable that Chad would hear about it. When he called me, his voice was soft, tinged with concern. "Hey," he began hesitantly, "I heard what happened. Are you okay?" Hearing his voice brought a mix of emotions, relief, anger, and sadness all at once. "Yeah," I said, forcing a small laugh. "I mean, it's been a whirlwind, but I'm okay. Are you?" Chad hesitated before answering. "I don't know. I feel like this is all my fault," he said, his words heavy with guilt. "I never wanted to cause problems between you and Karen. Maybe it would have been better if I just stayed away." Those words hit me harder than anything Karen had said. "No," I replied firmly. "Don't ever think that. This wasn't your fault, not even a little bit. Karen showed who she really was, and I'm glad I found out now rather than later. You didn't cause this, Chad. She did." He was quiet for a moment, and I could tell he was trying to process everything. "But if I hadn't come out, if I were just—" He started, but I cut him off. "Stop," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. "Who you are isn't something you need to apologize for. Ever. If someone has a problem with it, that's on them, not you. And I'll be damned if I let anyone make you feel like you're less than the incredible person you are. Karen didn't deserve to be a part of my life if she couldn't accept you." There was a pause before Chad finally spoke again, his voice softer now. "You really mean that?" "Of course I do," I said. "You're my brother, Chad, my favorite person in the whole world. I wouldn't want to celebrate the biggest day of my life without you there. And honestly, I wouldn't want someone like her there either." For the first time during the call, I heard him laugh, a small but genuine sound that made everything feel worth it. "Thanks," he said simply. "That means everything to me." If there was one thing Karen's family was good at, it was making their opinions known. After news of the breakup began circulating, it didn't take long for my phone to light up with a barrage of messages and calls, each more venomous than the last. Most of them came from numbers I didn't even recognize, but the tone was unmistakable. Words like selfish, disgrace, and even unmanly were thrown around as if I had personally wronged each of them. At first, I tried ignoring the messages, but they kept coming. Some accused me of ruining Karen's life, while others painted her as a victim of my overreaction. What stung most wasn't the insults. It was the realization that Karen's hateful comments about Chad weren't isolated to her. Her family seemed to share the same toxic beliefs, and now they were directing that poison at me. Blocking their numbers became a necessity. Each notification felt like a weight on my chest, a reminder of just how deeply Karen's values clashed with mine. But the real blow came when her parents sent an email, long, formal, and dripping with disdain. They berated me for humiliating their daughter and accused me of destroying the wedding over something as trivial as a personal opinion. Trivial. That word alone sent a wave of anger coursing through me. How could they reduce Chad's identity, his existence, to something as insignificant as a personal opinion? It only solidified my decision to block every single one of them. Karen's family wasn't just defending her, they were doubling down on the very hatred that had ended our relationship. Their messages were meant to hurt me, but all they did was confirm that walking away from Karen and everything she represented was the best choice I could have made. The aftermath of the breakup wasn't limited to Karen's family. Our shared circle of friends quickly became a minefield of opinions and shifting loyalties. Some reached out to me with messages of support, appalled by Karen's comments and validating my decision to call off the wedding. Others were more cautious, trying to play neutral while quietly distancing themselves from both of us. But then there were those who sided with Karen, and their reactions stung the most. "I get that you're upset," one of them said in a message, "but was canceling the wedding really necessary? Karen's been devastated, and honestly it feels like you overreacted." Overreacted? The word made my blood boil. How could anyone think standing up for Chad, and for what was right, was an overreaction? It wasn't just about a wedding. It was about refusing to tolerate hatred and bigotry, especially when it targeted someone I loved. But explaining that to people who didn't want to understand felt like shouting into a void. A few mutual friends went further, openly criticizing me. "Karen had a point," one text read. "Family dynamics are complicated, and maybe you could have handled this more privately. Airing all this drama made things worse for everyone." I realized then that not everyone would see the situation the way I did, and that was okay. It hurt to see friendships fracture under the weight of this conflict, but I wasn't going to apologize for my choices. The people who truly understood me, who valued love, acceptance, and loyalty, stood by my side without hesitation. At the same time, I felt a sense of clarity. The breakup had not only revealed Karen's true nature, but also who among my friends genuinely supported me and my values. It wasn't about choosing sides, it was about standing up for what mattered most. Those who couldn't see that were people I didn't need in my life. While Karen's family launched their campaign of hostility, her own response was surprisingly different. She didn't bombard me with anger or insults. Instead, her messages alternated between guilt-tripping and tearful pleas. It was a strange dichotomy. One moment she would claim I had ruined her life, and the next she'd beg for forgiveness, as if we could somehow undo everything that had happened. The first message came late at night, a wall of text filled with emotional appeals. "I can't believe you did this to me," she wrote. 4 years just gone over a single argument. Do you even care about me at all? About what we built together?" I stared at my phone, unsure how to respond. Part of me wanted to lash out, to remind her that this wasn't about a single argument, but about her hateful beliefs and unwillingness to apologize. But I knew that engaging would only prolong the inevitable. Instead, I left her message unanswered. A few days later, her tone shifted. "I miss you," she wrote. "We can work through this. Please, let's just talk." It was hard to reconcile this pleading version of Karen with the person who had so coldly dismissed my brother and everything he stood for. But what struck me most was what was missing in her messages. Not once did she apologize for what she said about Chad. Not once did she acknowledge the pain her words had caused. When I finally responded, it was with brutal honesty. "Karen," I wrote, "this isn't something we can fix. You showed me who you really are, and I can't unsee that. You didn't just insult Chad, you insulted me, my values, and everything I stand for. I need you to stop contacting me." Her reply came quickly, filled with tears and self-pity. "I've lost everything," she said. "My friends, my reputation, and now you." Over a word. A word. That was all it was to her. A fleeting comment, not the reflection of deeply rooted beliefs that had shattered our future together. It was clear then that Karen didn't truly understand the gravity of what she had done. And if she couldn't grasp that, there was nothing left to say. As the details of my breakup with Karen spread among our social circles and beyond, I couldn't help but notice how quickly opinions formed. Social media, word of mouth, and even casual conversations became vehicles for speculation and judgment. The story of why the wedding was called off seemed to take on a life of its own. To my surprise, much of the feedback I received was overwhelmingly supportive. People who had only met Chad a handful of times, or knew him through me, reached out with words of encouragement. "Good for you," one acquaintance messaged. "Family is everything, and standing up for your brother like that shows real integrity." Another said, "I never would have guessed Karen thought that way. You dodged a bullet." Even strangers on the periphery of my life weighed in, sharing their admiration for my decision to prioritize love and acceptance over keeping the peace. It was a strange feeling, seeing my private ordeal play out so publicly, but the support reminded me that I wasn't alone in my beliefs. At the same time, Karen wasn't spared from public scrutiny. Her words and actions were no longer confined to the privacy of our relationship. They were out in the open, and people were judging her for them. Some mutual friends who had initially sided with her began to distance themselves after learning the full extent of what she had said about Chad. Others openly condemned her, calling her behavior hateful and outdated. I didn't revel in the backlash she was facing, but I also didn't shield her from it. Karen's hatred had consequences, and she needed to face them. For me, the public's reaction wasn't about validation. It was about recognizing that standing up for what's right can inspire others to do the same. Amid all the chaos, my main concern was still Chad. The fallout from the cancelled wedding and Karen's hateful comments had taken on a life of its own, and I worried about how much of it would reach him. The last thing I wanted was for Chad to feel responsible for any of this. When I called him to check in, his voice was warm but cautious. "I'm okay," he assured me before I could even ask. "Really, I am, but you don't have to keep fighting everyone for me. It's not worth it." Hearing him say that broke my heart a little. "Of course it's worth it," I said firmly. "You're worth it, Chad. I'd fight this battle 100 times over if it meant protecting you." Chad sighed, and I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "I just don't want you to feel like you have to go through all of this because of me. I know how much you cared about Karen." I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. "This isn't about you causing anything," I said. "Karen's words were her choice, not yours. And honestly, I don't care how much I loved her before. Anyone who thinks the way she does about you isn't someone I can love. Period." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when Chad spoke again, his voice was softer. "You always know how to make me feel better," he said. "I don't deserve a big brother like you." I laughed, even as I felt a lump rise in my throat. "You deserve everything good in this world, Chad. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise." That conversation reinforced why I had made the choices I did. At the end of the day, protecting Chad's happiness wasn't just about defending him. It was about showing him that he was loved, valued, and worthy of respect. No amount of backlash or drama could ever make me regret standing by him. As the dust settled, I found myself replaying the past 4 years of my relationship with Karen, searching for signs I might have missed. Hindsight is a cruel teacher, and now that I had the full picture, I began to see the subtle red flags that had been there all along. Karen had always been opinionated, a trait I admired in the beginning. She was confident and unapologetic, qualities I thought spoke to her strength of character. But as I looked back, I realized how often her opinions crossed the line into judgment. There were small comments, offhand remarks about people she didn't approve of, sometimes about strangers, other times about acquaintances. She would say things like, "I just don't get why they live like that," or "It's their choice, but it's not normal." At the time, I brushed those comments off, chalking them up to ignorance rather than malice. I thought she was just blunt, maybe a little set in her ways. I never imagined that those seemingly minor judgments were a reflection of a much deeper prejudice. Her discomfort with certain topics, her avoidance of conversations about equality or inclusivity, all of it felt glaringly obvious now. Even her behavior toward Chad before the wedding planning made more sense in hindsight. There had always been a distance between them, an underlying tension I couldn't quite put my finger on. Karen was polite, but never warm. She never went out of her way to engage with Chad or get to know him, which struck me as odd considering how close we were. I had convinced myself that it was just a matter of personalities not clicking, but now I realized that it had always been more than that. It wasn't just about Karen, though. Reflecting on these moments made me question myself too. Why had I ignored these signs? Was I so eager to see the best in her that I overlooked the worst? It was a painful realization, but an important one. If nothing else, this experience taught me the value of trusting my instincts and paying attention to the smaller things. Red flags don't always come with flashing lights. Sometimes they're the quiet details we choose to ignore. During the whirlwind of emotions and fallout, one thing became abundantly clear. I couldn't have navigated this storm alone. The support of close friends and family proved to be a lifeline, grounding me when I felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had happened. They weren't just bystanders, they were allies, standing firmly by my side when it mattered most. My best friend, Mike, was one of the first people to reach out after the news broke. "Man, I'm proud of you," he said without hesitation. "Calling off a wedding isn't easy, but you did the right thing. Chad's lucky to have you." His words hit me harder than I expected, reminding me that even in the toughest moments I wasn't alone in my convictions. My parents, too, showed a level of understanding that I hadn't anticipated. Growing up, they had always been more hands-off, but when it came to this situation, they were quick to step in and offer their support. "We're proud of the man you've become," my dad said during a late-night phone call. "Family means everything, and you made the right choice." Even friends I hadn't spoken to in years reached out to offer words of encouragement. Their messages reminded me that love and acceptance weren't as rare as Karen's actions had made them seem. But most importantly, Chad had his own allies. Friends and extended family rallied around him, reminding him that he was cherished and valued. It was heartwarming to see people come together to make sure he knew he wasn't alone. The importance of allies in moments like these can't be overstated. They weren't just supporting me, they were reinforcing the values of love and acceptance that I had fought so hard to defend. Despite the overwhelming support I received, self-doubt crept in during the quieter moments. Late at night, when the messages stopped coming and the house was silent, I'd find myself replaying everything in my head. Was canceling the wedding the right decision? Could I have handled things differently? These questions lingered like unwelcome guests, gnawing at my resolve. It wasn't that I doubted my stance on Chad, or my refusal to tolerate Karen's hatred. On that I was unwavering, but the weight of ending a 4-year relationship and dismantling a future we had spent so long building wasn't easy to bear. I wondered if I could have found a way to salvage things, if there had been a middle ground I had overlooked. I replayed every argument, every conversation, searching for signs that might have pointed to a different outcome. Could I have addressed Karen's prejudices sooner? Had I been too quick to draw a line in the sand? These thoughts were relentless, and for a while they felt like an anchor pulling me down. But as I sat with these doubts, I kept coming back to one undeniable truth. This wasn't about a single decision or moment. It was about who Karen was at her core. Her refusal to apologize, to even acknowledge the hurt she had caused, showed me that there was no middle ground. Trying to salvage the relationship would have meant compromising my values and betraying Chad. I leaned on the words of my friends and family during these moments of uncertainty. Their reassurances reminded me of why I had made the choices I did. More importantly, I reminded myself of the look on Chad's face when I told him I had his back no matter what. That look of gratitude and love reaffirmed everything. Self-doubt is a powerful force, but so is conviction. I wasn't perfect, and maybe I hadn't handled everything flawlessly, but at the end of the day I knew I had acted out of love, for my brother, for myself, and for the kind of future I wanted to build. That, above all else, gave me peace. In the midst of all the turmoil, one thing became crystal clear. My love for Chad was worth every ounce of struggle, every hard decision, and every backlash I faced. It wasn't just about him being my brother. It was about the person he was and what he represented in my life. Chad had always been my constant, my confidant, and the one person who had never let me down. Protecting him wasn't a burden, it was an honor. Thinking back to our childhood, I remembered the countless times we had leaned on each other. Whether it was navigating our parents' absence or celebrating the small wins in life, Chad was always there, and I was always there for him. That kind of bond isn't easily broken, and it certainly wasn't something I was willing to compromise on for anyone, not even Karen. I thought about the promises I had made to Chad over the years, to always support him, to always have his back. Those weren't just words, they were commitments rooted in a lifetime of shared experiences. When Karen tried to strip away his worth with her hateful comments, it wasn't just Chad she was attacking, it was everything we stood for as brothers. This realization fueled my resolve. Love isn't just about romantic relationships, it's about the people who truly matter, the ones who shape us and give our lives meaning. Chad had been that person for me since day one, and no wedding, no relationship could ever take precedence over him. In standing up for Chad, I wasn't just defending him, I was affirming the values we both held dear: love, acceptance, and loyalty. And if that meant losing Karen and facing the fallout, so be it. Chad was worth it, and he always would be. While I worked on rebuilding my life, Karen was left to confront the fallout of her actions. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, her world had shifted dramatically. The confidence she once carried seemed to have faltered, replaced by a mixture of anger and regret, though not the kind of regret that stemmed from genuine reflection. Karen had always been someone who thrived on control, whether in our relationship or in her social circles. But after the breakup, that control began to slip. Many of her friends, particularly those who had initially tried to remain neutral, started to distance themselves as the full story unfolded. It wasn't just about me cancelling the wedding. It was about what she had said and the values she had revealed. People were starting to see her differently, and Karen didn't take it well. "She says you ruined her life," one mutual friend told me, her tone tinged with disbelief. "But honestly, it sounds like she's more upset about her reputation than about losing you." The comment stung, but it also made sense. Karen hadn't reached out to apologize or take accountability for her actions. Instead, she seemed more focused on painting herself as the victim of an overreaction. Her family, of course, rallied behind her. They doubled down on their narrative that I had acted irrationally, abandoning her over a difference of opinion. But that only served to alienate Karen further from the broader circle of friends who had once admired her. In trying to defend her, they inadvertently highlighted the very prejudices that had ended our relationship in the first place. It wasn't long before Karen started retreating from public spaces where she had once thrived. Her social media presence became sparse, and mutual friends noted how she avoided gatherings where her actions might be questioned. While I didn't take pleasure in her struggles, I couldn't ignore the sense of justice in seeing her face the consequences of her words. Karen's new reality wasn't something I dwelled on, but it was a reminder of the impact our actions have on the people around us. She had made her choices, and now she was living with them. While Karen grappled with the fallout of her actions, something truly heartwarming began to unfold, an outpouring of support for Chad. The same social circles that had turned on Karen rallied around my brother in ways that neither of us had anticipated. Messages of encouragement, love, and solidarity started flooding in, not just from close friends, but from people who had only heard about the situation through mutual connections. Chad was initially overwhelmed by the attention. He wasn't the type to seek the spotlight, and the idea of becoming a symbol of resilience in the face of bigotry was foreign to him. "I'm not sure why everyone's making such a big deal about me," he said during one of our conversations. "I'm just me." But that humility, that genuine kindness, was exactly why people were drawn to him. Chad had always been someone who radiated warmth, and his ability to remain gracious and composed, despite everything, only amplified that. Friends started reaching out to him directly, expressing their admiration for how he had handled himself and assuring him that he was loved exactly as he was. One message in particular stood out, a heartfelt note from a mutual friend who had struggled with their own identity for years. "Seeing how your brother stood up for you gives me hope," they wrote. "It's a reminder that there are people out there who will fight for us, no matter what." When Chad shared it with me, his eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I didn't realize how much this could mean to someone else," he said quietly. The support didn't stop there. Invitations to social gatherings poured in, often with explicit mentions that Chad was not just welcome, but celebrated. People who had once been casual acquaintances became close allies, eager to show him that he was part of a community that valued him for who he was. Watching Chad thrive in the aftermath of such a painful experience filled me with pride. It wasn't just about proving Karen wrong, it was about reaffirming that love and acceptance always outweigh hate. Chad didn't just survive the ordeal, he grew from it, surrounded by people who saw his worth and embraced it wholeheartedly. Looking back, the experience with Karen and the cancelled wedding wasn't just about the end of a relationship or standing up for Chad. It became a moment of profound growth, teaching me lessons about love, loyalty, and the kind of life I wanted to build. The most glaring lesson was the importance of paying attention to values. Karen's prejudices didn't develop overnight. They were there all along, hidden in small comments and avoided conversations. I realized how easy it had been to overlook those red flags in the name of maintaining harmony. But true harmony can only exist when both people share a foundation of mutual respect and acceptance, something Karen and I clearly lacked. Another lesson was about the power of standing firm. Saying no to Karen's demands wasn't easy, nor was cancelling the wedding. But sometimes the hardest decisions are the right ones. By refusing to compromise on Chad's inclusion, I reaffirmed my commitment to the people and values that truly matter. It wasn't just about protecting Chad, it was about protecting the principles that defined who I was. I also learned how deeply love extends beyond romance. My bond with Chad, my friends' unwavering support, and my family's encouragement reminded me that love exists in so many forms. While I lost one relationship, the strength of my connections with others became a source of healing and inspiration. Finally, I learned to trust my instincts. The doubts I had pushed aside, the unease I had ignored, they were my gut trying to tell me something. Ignoring them only delayed the inevitable. In the end, the experience wasn't just a lesson in what I didn't want, it was a reminder of what I did. I wanted a life rooted in love, understanding, and authenticity. Anything less wasn't worth settling for. As the weeks turned into months, I focused on moving forward. Letting go of the life I had planned with Karen wasn't easy. It felt like unlearning a routine I had rehearsed for years. But with each passing day, I began to see the breakup not as a failure, but as a turning point. I had taken a stand for what mattered most, and that gave me a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. The first step was reclaiming my time. Wedding planning had consumed so much of my energy, and suddenly I had all this space to fill. I threw myself into hobbies I had neglected, reading, hiking, and reconnecting with old friends. These simple joys became small victories, reminders that life didn't end with Karen's departure. My relationship with Chad grew even stronger. Without the tension Karen had brought, our interactions felt lighter, more natural. We started spending more time together, whether it was sharing meals or just talking late into the night. Chad's resilience was inspiring, and his ability to focus on the good despite everything reminded me to do the same. Professionally, I found myself more motivated than ever. Work became a place where I could channel my energy and regain a sense of purpose. I started setting new goals for myself, things I had put on hold while planning a future with Karen. Now, those goals felt like stepping stones toward a life that was fully mine. Emotionally, the process of healing was gradual, but steady. There were moments of doubt and sadness, of course, grieving the loss of what could have been, but those feelings were balanced by a growing sense of peace. The people around me, friends, family, and especially Chad, reminded me every day that I wasn't alone. Moving on didn't mean forgetting or erasing what had happened. It meant taking the lessons, the love, and the strength I had gained, and using them to build something new. With Karen behind me, I felt lighter, freer, and more certain of the kind of life I wanted to create moving forward. As I worked on moving forward, I couldn't help but notice how much Chad was growing through this experience as well. At first, he had been hesitant, even apologetic, as if he were to blame for the chaos that followed Karen's hateful words. But as time passed and the support from friends and family continued to pour in, Chad began to see himself in a new light. He once told me during a quiet moment, "I never thought people would care this much. I always felt like I had to hide parts of myself to keep things simple, to avoid making anyone uncomfortable." Hearing that broke my heart, but it also made me proud of how far he'd come. This ordeal had forced Chad into a spotlight he never sought, but instead of retreating, he stood taller. For Chad, the love and acceptance he received from our circle of friends and family became a powerful affirmation of his worth. He started to embrace his identity more openly, talking about his experiences and even reaching out to others in our community who might have felt similarly isolated. Watching him step into this role, someone who could inspire others with his courage, was nothing short of inspiring. He also began to set boundaries with people who didn't support him, something he'd struggled with in the past. "I'm done apologizing for who I am," he told me one day, his voice steady with resolve. "If someone has a problem with it, that's on them, not me." That newfound confidence extended beyond his personal life. Chad threw himself into his passions, pursuing opportunities that once seemed out of reach. Whether it was taking on a leadership role at work or volunteering for LGBTQ+ organizations, Chad's determination to make the world a better place for people like him was evident. Seeing Chad thrive reminded me why I had made the choices I did. Protecting him wasn't just about shielding him from harm, it was about giving him the space to become the incredible person he was always meant to be. His growth became a beacon of hope, proof that even the most painful experiences could lead to something beautiful. As time went on, Karen's presence in my life faded into silence. The messages and calls that had once come in waves slowed to a trickle before stopping altogether. At first, I wasn't sure if her silence was intentional or if she had simply run out of things to say. Either way, I welcomed the quiet. I occasionally heard snippets about her from mutual friends, mostly vague mentions of her keeping a low profile and avoiding social gatherings where she might run into people who knew the full story. It seemed that the backlash she had faced had left her isolated, though whether that isolation led to self-reflection or bitterness, I didn't know. And honestly, I didn't care. Karen's absence felt like the final step in closing that chapter of my life. Without her attempts to contact me or her family's intrusive messages, I could focus fully on rebuilding. The relief was palpable. I no longer had to explain myself or justify my actions to anyone. The decision to walk away from her and her values had been mine, and her silence only reinforced that I had made the right choice. In those rare moments when I thought about her, it was less about anger or regret, and more about acceptance. Karen had shown me who she was, and I had believed her. There was no use dwelling on what might have been, or wishing for an apology that would likely never come. Her silence, whether out of shame or pride, was enough of an answer. For me, Karen became less of a person and more of a lesson, a reminder of what I wouldn't accept in my life moving forward. With her gone, I could finally focus entirely on the relationships and values that truly mattered. With Karen behind me, I began to focus on the future, a future free from the toxicity and judgment that had overshadowed the final months of our relationship. It wasn't just about starting over, it was about redefining what happiness and fulfillment looked like on my own terms. One of the first steps in this new chapter was surrounding myself with people who shared my values. I made a conscious effort to spend more time with friends and family who celebrated love and acceptance in all its forms. These connections became a source of healing and joy, reminding me that the people who truly matter will always show up for you, even in your darkest moments. Chad played a central role in this journey. Our bond had always been strong, but after everything we had been through, it felt unshakable. We began creating new traditions together, from weekly dinners to spontaneous road trips. These moments became a testament to the strength of our relationship and a celebration of the love that had endured, despite Karen's attempts to undermine it. I also took time to focus on myself. For so long, my identity had been tied to the idea of being Karen's partner and planning a future with her. Letting go of that was both liberating and challenging. I started exploring hobbies I had set aside, like photography and cooking, and even began considering new career opportunities that aligned with my passions. Through it all, I realized that happiness isn't something you wait for, it's something you create. Letting go of Karen wasn't just about avoiding a toxic relationship, it was about making room for the life I truly wanted. As I moved forward, I felt a sense of clarity and peace that I hadn't experienced in years. This new beginning wasn't about forgetting the past, it was about honoring the lessons I had learned and building a life rooted in love, authenticity, and acceptance. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. As I reflected on everything that had happened, one thing stood out above all else. This wasn't just a story about a breakup. It was a story about love, the kind of love that defines who you are and the kind of love worth fighting for. For me, that love had always been embodied in my relationship with Chad. Our bond had been tested in ways I never could have anticipated. Karen's words and actions could have easily driven a wedge between us or left Chad questioning his worth, but instead they became a catalyst for something stronger. I stood up for my brother, yes, but Chad also stood up for himself. He grew in ways that left me in awe, transforming pain into strength and turning rejection into an opportunity to inspire others. The support we received from friends and family was another powerful reminder of what love can do. It reinforced my belief that hate and prejudice, no matter how loud, are no match for a community built on acceptance and compassion. Chad became a shining example of this, his resilience and grace resonating far beyond our immediate circle. For me, the experience shaped how I approached life moving forward. It taught me to value the people who truly matter, to prioritize my principles, and to never shy away from standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. It also reminded me that love isn't limited to one form or relationship. Romantic love is important, but the love between siblings, friends, and chosen family can be just as powerful, if not more. As Chad and I sat together one evening, reflecting on the whirlwind of the past year, he turned to me with a smile. "I hope you know how much it meant to me," he said, his voice soft. "Not just what you did, but who you've always been." I didn't have to respond with words. The look in his eyes said it all: gratitude, love, and an unbreakable bond. This journey had been painful, yes, but it had also been transformative. And as I moved forward, I carried with me the knowledge that standing up for love, Real, unconditional love was the best decision I had ever made.